The alarm clock does not announce the morning. It announces a continuation. For her, the transition from sleep to wakefulness is not a restoration of vitality, but a gradual re-immersion into a familiar, heavy atmosphere. She opens her eyes, and the room shadowed and still seems to lean in, waiting for her to assume the burden. Before her feet even touch the cold floorboards, the diagnostic begins. She feels it immediately. A dull, rhythmic ache residing in the lower lumbar, a tightness that has taken up permanent residence in the hinges of her jaw, and that singular, sharp sensation behind the eyes. A phantom pressure that never quite dissipates, regardless of how many hours she lay in the dark. It is not the weariness of a day well spent. It is the exhaustion of a soul that has been running a marathon in its sleep. She is a woman of diligence. She has sought the counsel of experts, submitted to the scrutiny of clinical tests, and followed the protocols prescribed by those who measure health in milligrams and blood counts. She has done what is required. Yet, there remains a presence an uninvited guest in the architecture of her life. It is a constriction in the chest that manifests with cruel precision on Sunday evenings, a low-grade hum of apprehension that has played in the background of her consciousness for so long that she has mistakenly categorized it as personality. She walks to the window, the fabric of her robe feeling heavy against her skin. There is a grief here, an old, stowaway emotion she packed into a box years ago, sealed with the duct tape of no time, and just keep moving. The box remains in the corner of her soul, its edges frayed, its contents pressing outward against the floorboards. She looks at her reflection in the glass and sees not a broken woman, but a woman whose body is attempting to speak a language she has long refused to translate. The air in the room is thick with the unspoken, a static charge of potential energy that has nowhere to go. To understand this woman, and the thousands who mirror her existence, we must move past the surface-level symptoms and descend into the mechanics of the inner life. Why does a body, ostensibly healthy by clinical standards, manifest the somatic evidence of deep distress? And how does an invisible, historical grief eventually transmute itself into physical reality? At the core of this paradox lies the fallacy of the disconnected self. Modernity encourages a dualistic view. The body is a machine, a biological vessel that requires mechanical maintenance, while the self is a separate entity that resides in the intellect. When the machine falters, we fix the gear. If the gear is fine, we conclude the machine is fine. But Florence Scovel Shinn, a sage of the early 20th century, understood that the body is not a machine. It is an instrument. An instrument is governed by resonance. It is uniquely sensitive to the climate in which it is housed. If the inner atmosphere, the subterranean currents of belief, memory, and unspoken fear is saturated with moisture, the instrument will inevitably warp. The why. We carry this weight because we are conditioned to believe that life is a series of external problems to be solved, rather than an internal experience to be cultivated. We operate under the delusion that if we simply work harder, achieve more, or suppress the negative long enough, the body will eventually stop protesting. But the subconscious mind is not a vault. It is a projector. It does not hide our traumas. It gives them back to us in the fabric of our daily lives, translating our unaddressed grief into the stiffness of a shoulder or the persistent fog of a tired mind. The how. The process is cumulative. Each time we ignore a feeling of resentment or a whisper of fear, we are essentially depositing that energy into the unopened box. Over time, the pressure within that box increases. The subconscious mind, seeking to maintain its consistency with our internal narrative, reinforces this state. We are not being punished by the universe. We are witnessing the inevitable harvest of the mental seeds we have sown. The tightening of the chest is not an enemy to be fought. It is a feedback loop, a signal that the instrument is struggling to resonate in harmony with the truth of the person it is meant to serve. This is the threshold of true healing. It requires the courage to acknowledge that the inner world is the primary environment. To change the outer expression, the fatigue, the pain, the restlessness, one must first address the climate of the interior. In the high mountains of a forgotten kingdom, there lived a traveler who was renowned for the strength of her pack. She crossed vast glaciers and arid plains, always moving, always seeking the next summit. She carried a heavy, iron-bound chest secured to her back with leather straps that had worn deep grooves into her shoulders. People would see her passing and remark on her endurance. "How strong she is," they whispered, "to carry such a burden across the world." But the traveler did not carry the chest because it was full of gold or necessary supplies. She carried it because she had forgotten she was the one who had locked it. One evening, caught in a blinding snowstorm, she sought shelter in a cave. Exhausted, she collapsed, the weight of the chest pinning her against the stone wall. For the first time in years, she had nowhere to run and no goal to achieve. The stillness of the cave was deafening. In that silence, she reached back and touched the cold, unyielding iron of the lock. She remembered a day, long ago, at the start of her journey, when she had placed a single, painful memory into this box and shut it tight. She had intended to open it when she reached the valley, but the road had been so steep that she had convinced herself the box was simply a permanent part of her equipment. She fumbled in her pocket and found, to her astonishment, a small tarnished key. It was not a grand or imposing tool. It was simple, unassuming, and had been with her the entire time. She turned the lock. The click echoed through the cave, sharper than the howling wind outside. She did not find monsters inside. She found the forgotten fragments of her own self, the grief she hadn't wept, the anger she hadn't allowed to breathe, and the softness she had traded for survival. As she sat in the dark, she began, piece by piece, to take the items out. She did not cast them into the fire, she held them. She examined them in the light of her lantern, acknowledging the weight they had held. And as she did, the grooves in her shoulders began to throb, not with the pain of the straps, but with the sudden, rushing relief of blood returning to restricted veins. She realized then that the chest had never been a necessity. It had been an anchor. And the only thing keeping her from standing upright was her own refusal to stop moving long enough to turn the key. To begin this journey is not to embark on a quest for perfection, but to engage in an act of radical self-kindness. You are the steward of your own inner environment, and the first step is to cease the policing of your own soul. You do not need to think better thoughts or force a smile until your face aches. You need only to begin the process of unbracing. Consider this your first invitation. Today, identify one area where you are holding a habitual tension, not a physical one, but a mental one. Perhaps it is a story you keep repeating about a mistake you made, or a low-level worry about a future you cannot control. For just one moment, mentally set that story down. You do not have to resolve it. You do not have to justify it. Simply place it on the table in front of you and look at it, realizing that you are the one standing, and it is merely the thing you are carrying. You are standing at the threshold. You have recognized the weight, and you have heard the lock turn. But there is a deeper mystery to uncover. We have discussed the nature of the burden, but we have yet to master the denial, the potent, silent, and often misunderstood tool that Florence Scovel Shinn used to dissolve the wrong conditions of the mind. In the next chapter, we will walk through the art of the architect, moving from the recognition of our inner atmosphere to the deliberate, master-level construction of a life that is no longer a reaction to fear, but a reflection of grace. The box is unlocked. The air is starting to change. Are you ready to see what happens when the weight is finally set down? The hour before the sun breaks, the horizon is not merely a measurement of time. It is a profound, velvet silence, the blue hour, when the world holds its breath, suspended between the exhausted memory of the night and the relentless expectations of the day. Imagine, if you will, a quiet room. The air is still, carrying the faint, crisp scent of impending dawn. In this room sits a desk, and on that desk rests a single, unlit candle. There is a paradox in this quietude. To the uninitiated observer, this silence is empty. It is a vacuum, waiting to be filled by the noise of the world, the chime of a notification, the hurried thoughts of a schedule, the frantic mental rehearsal of impending obligations. However, to the master of the inner life, this silence is not a vacuum, it is an environment. It is a fertile, waiting canvas. Within the mind of the individual in this room, a choice is being made, though it often occurs beneath the threshold of conscious awareness. The inner voice begins its daily ritual. For some, this voice is an architect of chaos, measuring the room against a standard of inadequacy, layering the silence with the phantom pressure of what must be done, and casting long, jagged shadows of anxiety across the morning floor. For others, the silence is met with a different quality of presence. They do not seek to fill the space, they seek to inhabit it. They recognize that the atmosphere they cultivate in these fleeting, sacred minutes will become the climate in which every event of their day must either flourish or wither. The candle remains unlit, but the potential for illumination or for darkness is already set. To grasp the philosophy of Florence Scovel Shinn, one must first dismantle the prevailing cultural obsession with the machine-like self. We have been taught to view our bodies and our lives as mechanisms, complex sets of gears and levers that must be constantly greased, repaired, and forced into specific configurations to yield the desired output. If the machine is slow, we force it. If it vibrates, we tighten the bolts. But what if the human experience is not mechanical, but instrumental? The philosophical why. If the body is a machine, then the mind is merely an operator, a technician tinkering with a stubborn system. But if the body is an instrument, a harp, a violin, a finely tuned chamber of resonant glass, then the mind is not a technician. The mind is the player and the composer. An instrument does not break. It falls out of tune. It responds with absolute fidelity to the vibrations projected into it. The why behind our chronic unrest is that we have been playing discordant notes into our own systems for decades, then wondering why the melody of our lives sounds like a lament. We have been projecting the frequency of not enough into our own resonance chambers, and the instrument, with dutiful, terrifying precision, has returned that frequency to us in the form of our physical reality. The recursive how. How do we shift from being the weary technician of a failing machine to the master architect of a resonant instrument? We must interrogate the relationship between the spoken word and the subconscious. Shinn understood that the subconscious mind is a literal, non-judgmental receiver. It does not possess a filter to determine whether your internal dialogue is true or false. It only recognizes the vibration of your conviction. When one repeats, "I am so tired," the subconscious does not hear a report. It hears an instruction. It proceeds to gather the resources, the chemistry of the body, the posture of the spine, the focus of the eye to manifest tiredness as the objective truth of the moment. We are, in every second, casting a spell upon ourselves. The recursively profound realization is this: we are already using the law of attraction, but we are using it to build our own prisons. The shift, therefore, is not about adding new powers or finding new knowledge. It is about the deliberate, disciplined cessation of the discordant notes. How does one stop the noise? By recognizing that the environment you inhabit is not dictated by the weather outside the window, but by the atmosphere you choose to cultivate within. In the mid-1920s, in a sprawling, soot-stained metropolis, there lived a woman whose life was a study in profound, quiet dissonance. She was a professional archivist, tasked with the preservation of ancient, delicate manuscripts. Her days were spent in a windowless room, surrounded by dust and the scent of crumbling vellum. She was a woman of impeccable precision, yet her own life felt like a draft that refused to be finalized. She lived in a constant, low-level state of agitation. She blamed the city. She blamed the dampness of her apartment. She blamed the relentless, mechanical hum of the printing presses that roared near her home. She viewed her body as a vessel that was constantly being besieged by these external forces. Her health was failing not with any singular, catastrophic illness, but with a pervasive, thinning vitality that left her feeling like a ghost in her own skin. One afternoon, she encountered a woman who would later be recognized as a student of Shinn's teachings. This woman did not offer medicine. She offered a question. Why? She asked. Do you treat your inner space like a storage locker for everything that happens outside of you? The archivist was puzzled. It is my reality, she replied. I cannot help but be affected by the environment I occupy. The student smiled and handed her a small, ornate tuning fork. This tool does not fear the city, she said. It does not care about the soot or the noise. It has one purpose: to sound a singular, perfect note of A. When you strike it, it does not negotiate with the air around it. It demands that the air harmonize with it. Your life is not a storage locker for the world's chaos. It is a resonance chamber. You have been letting the chaos play you. It is time you played your own note. The archivist began a practice. She did not change her job, nor did she move from her apartment, but she began, every morning before entering the archives, to tune her inner environment. She would sit for 5 minutes and envision her life not as a reaction to her surroundings, but as a broadcast from her center. She replaced her internal monologue of "I am overwhelmed" with a deliberate, rhythmic affirmation of stability. Weeks turned into months. The external circumstances of her life remained largely the same. The city was still loud, the archive was still dusty. But the archivist began to change. The persistent, low-grade illness that had haunted her for years began to recede, not because she had ignored it, but because she had stopped feeding it the vibration of her own despair. She had become the lighthouse in a fog-bound harbor. She had learned that the architect of one's atmosphere does not need to change the world to change the climate of the soul. One only needs to hold the note long enough for the world to notice. To embody this truth is to claim your sovereignty as the architect of your own inner climate. You are not a victim of your mood, your environment, or your history. You are the one holding the tuning fork. Today, I invite you to conduct a simple, powerful experiment. For the next 24 hours, treat your inner voice as a guest in your home. Would you allow a guest to stand in your living room and tell you that you are inadequate? Would you allow a guest to narrate your life with themes of catastrophe and ruin? Of course not. You would show them the door. Your inner voice is the most frequent guest you will ever host. Beginning today, when that voice begins to spiral into fear or self-criticism, gently interrupt it. Do not fight it. Simply redirect it. Thank you for that observation, you might say, but we are choosing a different note today. Replace the discordant thought with a single, grounding phrase, a note of grace that you strike and hold. You have taken the first step toward reclaiming your status as the architect. You have seen how the atmosphere determines the harvest. But even with this newfound agency, there remains the question of the thieves, those persistent, phantom forces that creep into the nighttime of our minds and siphon away the very peace we are trying to construct. We have established the environment. Now we must secure the perimeter. In the next chapter, we descend into the shadows of the 4 great thieves of ease. We will face the fear, the resentment, the self-criticism, and the guilt that drain our reserves, and we will learn how to bar the door against them. The silence is deepening. The note is held. The journey into the inner fortress begins now. Picture a grand, vaulted chamber, the interior of the human heart. It is intended to be a sanctuary, a place of rest and light, adorned with the tapestries of one's own peace. Yet, if one were to observe the life of the average person with the eye of a silent, invisible sentinel, one would see something strikingly different. The grand doors are left ajar. The hearth, meant for the warmth of self-compassion, has grown cold. Across the polished marble floors, there move four silent, spectral figures. They do not arrive with a fanfare of trumpets or the violence of a thunderstorm. They enter like shadows at dusk, slipping through the cracks of one's routine. The first is a cloaked figure, forever peering into a dark, empty larder. The second is a jagged, hunched form, clutching a rusted blade of ancient grievances. The third is a translucent mirror-bearer who constantly distorts the reflection of the host. And the fourth is a hooded judge carrying a heavy, leaden ledger of imaginary debts. They do not seize the chamber by force. Instead, they simply take seats at the table. They settle in, one by one, until the host, the true master of the house, is squeezed into a corner, clutching their dignity to their chest, wondering why the room feels so cold, why the air has grown thin, and why they can no longer find the space to simply breathe. This is the state of the leaking vessel. It is the condition of being drained of one's natural birthright ease by the very guests we have unwittingly invited to stay. To restore the sanctuary, one must first identify the thieves. Florence Scovel Shinn, with the precision of a surgeon, identified these four forces as the primary predators of human vitality. They are not the causes of illness in the mechanical sense, but they are the thieves of ease, and ease is the foundation upon which all true wellness, physical and spiritual, is built. The recursive why. Why do we harbor these guests? Why does the human psyche cling to fear, resentment, self-criticism, and guilt? The answer lies in the ego's misinformed definition of survival. The ego believes that if it remains in a state of high alert, fearing the future, resenting the past, judging the self, and carrying the weight of past errors, it is somehow prepared. It is a recursive loop. We feed the thieves because we fear the emptiness that would remain if they left. We confuse the tightness of stress with the substance of a meaningful life. We believe that to be easy is to be vulnerable, and so we armor ourselves with anxiety. The philosophical how. How do these thieves operate? They work by siphoning the currency of attention. The human spirit has a finite supply of daily focus. When we direct that focus toward the phantom of a not enough future, fear, or the acidic replay of a past injury, resentment, or the relentless correction of our current identity, self-criticism, or the heavy chains of what I should have done, guilt, we are essentially giving our life force away. The analysis of ease. Shinn defined ease not as a lack of activity or a state of indolence, but as a state of non-resistance. It is the flow of the river that encounters no jagged rocks. When we allow these four thieves to inhabit our inner chamber, we create a dam of resistance. The river of life continues to flow, but it begins to swirl and stagnate against the obstructions we have placed. The body, being the physical instrument of the spirit, feels this stagnation as a low-grade hum of tension. To reclaim ease is not to fix the body. It is to evict the thieves and return the sanctuary to the one who was meant to inhabit it. In the high, thin air of a northern province, there existed a master weaver named Alara. She was famous for creating tapestries that appeared to breathe. The colors seemed to shift with the light, and the texture was as soft as a summer breeze. But Alara had a secret. For years her health had been failing. Her hands, once swift and sure, were beginning to tremble. She found it increasingly difficult to sit at her loom. She sought the advice of a local sage, a woman who lived in a cabin woven into the roots of an ancient cedar tree. The sage did not ask to see Alara's hands. She asked to sit in Alara's workshop. She watched as Alara worked, and then she pointed to the four corners of the room. "You have guests," the sage said simply. Alara laughed. "I have no guests. I am alone." "You are not alone," the sage replied. You are surrounded by 4 figures who have been weaving their own dark threads into your work. Look closely. She pointed to the first corner, where a gray, spindly shape stood, constantly checking the door for a thief who never came. That is fear, the sage whispered. It tells you that your thread will run out, that the market will crash, that you will be left with nothing. It makes your hands shake for the future. She pointed to the second, a silhouette of iron and vinegar. That is resentment. It reminds you of the teacher who once told you that you were untalented. It creates a knot in your stomach that pulls against every thread you lay. In the third stood a figure holding a cracked, smoke-stained mirror. Self-criticism. It asks you every hour if your work is enough. It convinces you that the beauty you create is a fraud. And in the fourth, a hooded figure knelt, weeping over a small, broken wooden shuttle. Guilt, the sage said. It tells you that you are undeserving of the beauty you create, that you have somehow sinned against the art itself. The sage looked at Ilara. They have been feeding on your attention. They have convinced you that their presence is the reason you work so hard. But they are not the source of your talent. They are the vampires of your energy. Ilara, for the first time, saw them. She did not drive them out with a sword. She simply stopped paying them attention. She turned back to her loom, and whenever the voice of fear whispered of scarcity, she whispered back, I am provided for. When resentment arrived, she breathed it out and said, I am free. The shadows did not vanish instantly, but as Ilara's internal atmosphere shifted, the room grew brighter. The thieves, deprived of their sustenance, began to fade into the corners, and eventually they vanished entirely. Ilara's hands stopped trembling. The work was no longer a struggle. It was an extension of the peace she had finally invited back home. The lesson is clear. Your sanctuary is your own. You have the sovereign right to choose your guests. To begin this reclamation today, conduct a sanctuary audit. For the next 3 hours, notice when your energy drops. Pause, breathe, and ask yourself, which of the 4 thieves is currently sitting at my table? Is it the fear of a future you cannot control? Is it the resentment of a past you cannot change? Is it the self-criticism of a performance that is already finished? Is it the guilt of a debt you have already paid in full? Do not judge yourself for their presence. Simply acknowledge them, and then, with the authority of the host, offer them the door. You now understand the thieves. You know their names, their faces, and their strategies. But what of the specific mechanics of the inverted faith that empowers fear? We have labeled it, but we have not yet fully disarmed it. In the next chapter, we descend into the deepest vault of the psyche. We will uncover the true nature of the fear that hums beneath your ordinary days, and we will learn how to turn that potent, creative energy back toward the life you were actually meant to live. The shadows are receding, the hearth is warming, and the path forward is becoming clear. Are you prepared to face the architect of your own undoing? The night is not dark. It is merely the absence of the light we have forgotten how to carry. Imagine a person standing in the center of their own living room, late in the evening. The house is silent, yet the atmosphere is electric with a tension that defies the stillness. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of a distant streetlight through the curtains, is interpreted by the mind not as a part of the natural rhythm of a home, but as a potential herald of catastrophe. This is the state of chronic, ambient fear. It is a peculiar, persistent frequency that hums beneath the ordinary days, a ghost vibration that never quite reaches a crescendo but never truly vanishes. It is the fear that manifests as a subtle clenching of the muscles, a shallow breath held in the upper chest, and a constant, rapid-fire scanning of the horizon for threats that do not exist. To the observer, this person appears to be walking on glass. They are not in the room. They are in the projected future, mentally fortifying themselves against a collapse that is always 30 seconds away. It is a paradox of endurance. The individual is spending more energy bracing for the fall than they would spend simply standing upright. They are exhausted, not by the heavy lifting of life, but by the weight of their own anticipated disaster. To dismantle this fear, we must reach into the very mechanism of the human spirit and discover its hidden anatomy. Florence Scovel Shinn, with a clarity that borders on the revolutionary, declared that fear is not the opposite of faith, it is inverted faith, the recursive why. Why does the mind, a device of such immense creative potential, default to the production of terror? Why do we expend such colossal effort imagining outcomes we do not desire? The answer lies in the nature of the imagination itself. The imagination is a mirror. It does not care what it reflects. It only reflects what it is shown. We fear because we believe that our concern, our focus, is a form of protection. We believe that if we worry enough, if we monitor the danger with enough intensity, we might somehow prevent it. We are addicted to the sensation of preparation. We confuse the mental exhaustion of hypervigilance with the security of control. We fear because we have not yet understood that the energy of our worry is the exact same energy required for the manifestation of our deepest desires. The philosophical how. How does fear become inverted faith? Consider the structure of faith. It is the creative, expectant energy directed toward a desired reality. It is the unwavering conviction that something exists before it is seen. Now, consider the structure of fear. It is the creative, expectant energy directed toward a dreaded reality. It is the unwavering conviction that a disaster exists before it is seen. Both require the exact same mental machinery, the ability to hold a vision in the mind with sufficient conviction to elicit a physiological response. Fear is simply faith pointing the wrong way. The mechanism is recursive. The more we feed the vision of what we fear, the more real that vision becomes in our nervous system. The nervous system, never intended to distinguish between a physical threat and a persistent thought, activates the fight or flight response. We become chemically addicted to the adrenaline of our own anxiety. We are not just thinking about fear. We are practicing it. We are masters of the art of creating the things we dread. The shift is not to stop the imagination, but to stop pointing it toward the cliff and begin pointing it toward the horizon. In the ancient annals of the Eastern kingdoms, there lived a legendary archer named Calin. He was known throughout the land for his unerring aim. His arrows could pierce a falling leaf from 100 paces. Kings sent for him, and great armies sought his counsel. Yet, there came a season of great strife, and for the first time in his life, Calin was tasked with defending the gate of his own home. As the opposing forces gathered on the horizon, Calin stood upon the ramparts. He took his bow, but as he reached for an arrow, his hand began to tremble. He looked at the distant line of the enemy and saw, in his mind's eye, the gate burning. He saw the breach. He saw the failure of his lineage. With every breath, he constructed the vision of his own defeat so vividly that his body began to mirror the outcome. He was so terrified of missing the target that his muscles locked, his focus shattered, and the bow, the extension of his own spirit, felt like a dead weight. His teacher, an old woman who lived in the shadow of the gate, climbed the ramparts. She saw Calin's trembling hands and the look of terror in his eyes. She did not speak of the enemy. She did not speak of the danger. She simply reached out and covered his eyes with her thin, weathered hands. "You are not shooting at the enemy," she whispered. "You are shooting at your own vision of failure. You have spent all morning constructing the moment of your own ruin. You are feeding the target with your dread." "But they are coming," Calin cried. "I must be ready." "Your readiness is not in your fear," she countered. "Your readiness is in your aim. You are currently using your creative power to ensure that you miss. Direct your gaze, Calin. Do not look at the storm. Look at the space where the arrow must land." She pulled her hands away. Calin stood in the howling wind. He felt the familiar pull of the fear, the image of the breach, the fire, the collapse trying to reclaim his focus. He took a breath, and with a deliberate, agonizing act of will, he inverted the vision. He stopped seeing the failure and began to see the arrow finding its mark. He felt the tension in the bow, not as a burden, but as potential energy. He released the fear, and in its place, he placed the arrow of his intent. The shot was true. The defense held. Kalen learned that day that the archer does not defeat the enemy. The archer defeats the internal vision that makes the enemy inevitable. Fear is the energy of your creation, misapplied. To embody this truth, you must become a conscious custodian of your own attention. Today, practice the inversion technique. When you feel that familiar, low-grade hum of ambient fear, stop immediately. Do not try to calm down by ignoring it. That is impossible. Instead, take the energy of that fear, the intensity, the focus, the mental vividness, and rotate it 180 degrees. Ask yourself, if I can imagine this failure with such terrifying clarity, what does it feel like to imagine the success with the exact same intensity? Take the energy you were using to prepare for the worst and use it to prepare for the best. You are not changing the effort. You are changing the vector. You are shifting from inverted faith to actual faith. You are turning the arrow toward the light. If you are ready to reclaim your creative power and turn your focus toward the horizon, subscribe to the channel. Join this growing circle of architects who are learning to aim their lives with precision and grace. You now understand the anatomy of fear. You have seen how it functions as a mirror, and you have learned how to invert the reflection. But there remains the matter of the past, the old anger and the old grievances that sit heavy in the chest, acting as an anchor to the very life you are trying to outgrow. We have addressed the fear of the future. Now, we must address the resentment of the past. In the next chapter, we will delve into the corrosive power of the unopened box of resentment. We will learn why forgiving others is not an act of kindness to them, but a necessity for your own soul's buoyancy. The bow is drawn, the aim is set, and the target is clear. Shall we release the arrow? There is a singular, agonizing posture that the human soul adopts when it is anchored to a grievance. Imagine a traveler standing on the precipice of a vast, emerald valley, a landscape of infinite possibility, sun-drenched and humming with the vitality of a new day. Yet, the traveler does not move. They stand perfectly still, their features hardened into a mask of perpetual effect. In their right hand, they clutch a jagged, glowing cola, piece of burning charcoal that they have retrieved from the ashes of a fire that went out years, perhaps decades ago. The heat of the coal has long since seared their palm, blistering the skin, turning the flesh white and raw. They are in agony, their breath coming in short, pained stabs, their attention entirely consumed by the searing sensation in their hand. They are waiting for someone to come and take the coal from them. They are waiting for the person who originally placed the coal in their hand to appear, to apologize, to acknowledge the burn, to finally provide the relief that the traveler has been denied. They believe that their suffering is proof of their righteousness. They believe that if they only hold the coal tight enough, if they only display their wounded hand with enough clarity, the universe or the person who wronged them will finally be forced to reckon with their pain. They do not realize that the one who gave them the coal has long since moved on, their own hands unburdened. While the traveler remains a prisoner of their own grip, watching the sun set over the valley, they are too paralyzed to enter. Resentment is the most expensive emotion in the human repertoire. It is a slow-motion consumption of one's own vitality, a psychological alchemy that turns the gold of the present moment into the leaden weight of the past. To understand this, we must deconstruct the mechanics of the rehearsed grievance. The recursive why. Why do we sustain resentment? Why does the human heart, which naturally yearns for expansion, instead choose to contract around the memory of an injury? The answer is a tragedy of the ego. The ego adopts the injury as an identity. It believes that if it forgives, it loses the narrative that explains its current unhappiness. We fear that if we lay down the grievance, we will be forced to confront the terrifying emptiness of who we are without our story of the wrong done to me. We cling to the anger because it provides a map of our own borders. It tells us who we are in relation to the world. We are the injured party, and that identity, however painful, feels safer than the vulnerability of having no one to blame. The philosophical. How? How does resentment act as an anchor? It operates through the mechanism of continuous retrieval. Every time we remember the slight, we are not merely recalling a memory. We are reenacting the neural pathways of the original trauma. We are literally reliving the moment of impact. The subconscious, as we have established, does not distinguish between the past event and the current thought. Therefore, the body secretes the same stress hormones, maintains the same muscular tension, and experiences the same constriction of the heart as if the offender were standing in the room at this very moment. We are not remembering the injury, we are recommitting it. The how of the release is the most difficult pivot in the human experience. It is the realization that forgiveness is not an act of benevolence toward the offender. It is an act of surgical extraction performed on one's own soul. It is the realization that the past is a finished manuscript. One cannot change the plot, but one can certainly stop reading the same scene over and over again, allowing the ink to bleed into every page of the future. In the high, desolate regions of the northern mountains, there lived a master stonemason named Julian. He was known for building bridges that could withstand the fiercest glacial floods. His work was his pride. His name was carved into the cornerstone of every structure he raised. But Julian's life was defined by a singular, cold stone he carried in his satchel. Years prior, he had entered into a partnership with a man named Elias. They had worked together on a grand archway. But in a moment of professional betrayal, Elias had stolen the plans, claimed the credit, and left Julian with nothing but the debt of the project. Julian had spent the next 20 years refining his hatred. Every night, he would sit by his fire and mentally compose the letter he would one day send to Elias, describing the full scope of the man's villainy. He would rehearse the argument, sharpen his defense, and nurture the sharp, cold stone of his anger until it shone like polished obsidian. His health began to fail. His heart, once rhythmic and strong, began to stutter, as if it were trying to pump through the weight of the stone he carried in his satchel. A traveling monk arrived in his village, a woman who sought shelter in Julian's workshop. She watched Julian as he obsessively polished the stone, his eyes glassy with the focus of his rage. "That is a fine stone," the monk remarked, her voice devoid of judgment. "What do you intend to build with it?" Julian looked at her, confused. "Build? I do not build with this. This is the weight of what Elias did to me. It is the evidence of his crime." The monk stepped closer. "The bridge you are building with that stone is not crossing the river, Julian. It is a bridge that leads nowhere but back to the day you were wronged. You have been carrying this rock for 20 years, and yet I see that Elias is not here. Elias is not carrying your bag. Elias is not feeling the weight in your back or the stutter in your heart. You are the only one who has been paying the price for his mistake. You have allowed his shadow to sit at your table for 2 decades. Julian looked at his bag. He felt, perhaps for the first time, the true, agonizing weight of the obsidian stone. He realized that the stone was not a monument to his integrity. It was a tombstone for his life. With a trembling hand, he reached into the bag. He did not throw the stone at someone else. He simply walked to the edge of the rushing, glacial river and opened his hand. The stone plummeted into the depths, vanishing instantly. The silence that followed was the first real peace he had known in 20 years. The stutter in his heart did not vanish, but the burden had been lifted. He was, at last, free to build the next bridge. To embody this truth is to realize that you are the primary beneficiary of your own forgiveness. The wrong that was done to you may have been real, it may have been cruel, and it may have been life-altering. But holding on to it is a task that yields no profit. Today, I challenge you to perform an act of unstorying. Identify the person or the memory that triggers the most consistent resentment in your inner world. Do not try to forgive them in a grand cinematic sense. That is often a process of time. Instead, simply stop feeding the story. The next time the memory arises, do not rehearse the arguments. Do not refine the grievance. Simply say to yourself, this event is finished. I am no longer a participant in the past. You have learned to address the future's fear and the past's resentment. But there remains the most insidious thief of all, the voice that resides inside the skin, the quiet, constant critic that whispers of your own inadequacy. We have addressed the external offenders. Now, we must address the internal one. In the next chapter, we descend into the mirror hall. We will confront the habit of self-criticism, the voice that measures you against standards that don't exist, and we will learn the transformative power of a kindness that doesn't require perfection. The weight is falling into the river, the air is growing lighter, and you are finally beginning to see the shape of the person you were meant to be. Are you ready to look in the mirror? The most profound tragedies of the human experience do not occur on battlefields or in the corridors of power. They occur in the silence of the morning, within the compass of a single mind. Imagine a person waking in the soft, gray light of dawn. The room is peaceful, the world outside is yet to stir, and the body is resting. But before the eyes have fully opened, before the first breath of the day has been drawn, the inner courtroom is already in session. Without a sound, without a gavel, the judge takes the bench. There is no jury, only the relentless, precise voice of the critic, beginning its daily audit of the self. It measures the person against a phantom standard, an invisible, shimmering ideal that is constantly receding, always just out of reach. It notes the fatigue that still lingers, it critiques the dreams that were forgotten in the night, and it casts a shadow of not enoughness over the potential of the coming hours. This person hasn't even stepped out of bed, yet they have already lost the day. It is a paradox of self-destruction. The individual is their own most faithful companion, yet they are their own most merciless tormentor. They navigate their existence with a voice that monitors their every flaw, a voice that whispers, with cold, rhythmic certainty, that they are perpetually short of the mark, and that the distance between who they are and who they should be is an unbridgeable canyon of failure. Self-criticism is the most intimate of the four thieves. It is not an intruder that breaks in from the outside. It is a ghost that has taken up residence in the very marrow of the psyche. To understand this force, we must look beneath the veneer of discipline and high standards to see the mechanism of the soul's self-erosion. The recursive. Why? Why do we sustain this voice? Why does the mind engage in a project of such persistent self-diminishment? The ego believes that, if it criticizes itself, it is somehow beating others to the punch. It is a protective, yet deeply misguided, mechanism. We believe that if we are the ones to highlight our flaws, we might somehow immunize ourselves against the judgment of the world. We equate self-criticism with self-improvement, confusing the biting whip of the critic with the guiding hand of a mentor. But the truth is that the critic does not want to improve us. The critic wants to limit us. It keeps us in a state of perpetual becoming, never allowing us the permission to simply be. The philosophical how. How does this voice construct our environment? The inner monologue is not merely an observer of our life. It is the atmosphere of our life. If one spends 16 hours a day in a room filled with toxic smoke, one does not need a medical theory to understand why the lungs are failing. Similarly, If one spends the entirety of their waking life in the inner environment of self-judgment, the soul, the instrument, will inevitably manifest the symptoms of that toxicity. The how of the transformation lies in the radical shift from scrutiny to hospitality. It is the realization that if we spoke to our dearest friends the way we speak to ourselves in the privacy of our own minds, we would have no friends left. The recursive realization is this: we are not the critic. We are the host of the critic. And the host has the authority to change the nature of the conversation. In the capital city of an ancient empire, there lived a master painter named Silas. He was commissioned by the emperor to paint a portrait that would capture the true reflection of a human soul. Silas was a man of infinite technical skill, but he was plagued by a self-loathing so profound that his brushes would often tremble as he worked. He would paint a stroke, stare at it, and then instantly smear it, convinced that he had captured only his own inadequacy. The emperor, growing impatient, sent for a master of the mirror arts, a woman from the far reaches of the desert, who carried only a silvered glass that held no frame. She watched Silas for 3 days. She saw him standing before the mirror, not to study his features, but to tally his flaws. She saw him look at his hands and whisper of their clumsiness. She saw him look at his brow and weep for his weariness. The woman approached the canvas and touched the drying paint. "Silas," she said, "you are not painting a portrait. You are painting a confession. You are attempting to capture the soul of a person who is currently being held hostage by a ghost." "I am a failure," Silas muttered, staring at the canvas. "My hands are not worthy of this task." "Your hands are perfect," she replied, picking up his palette. "It is your eyes that are bruised. You look at yourself with the eyes of a master who hates his own work. If you were a king, would you command your subjects with the malice you use upon yourself? If you were a father, would you break your child's spirit because they did not run as fast as the wind?" She picked up a brush and held it to the light. "Look at the mirror, Silas, but do not look for the flaws. Look for the person who is trying to create. Look for the courage of the effort, not the perfection of the result." Silas looked into the glass. For the first time, he did not look for the things he feared. He looked for the person he had been neglecting. He saw the tired, resilient hands. He saw the eyes that had searched for beauty even in the dark. He did not see a master, but he saw a human being, and for the first time, that was enough. He turned back to the canvas, and he did not paint with the desperate, jagged strokes of a critic. He painted with the patient, steady hand of a lover. The portrait, when it was finally revealed, was not a photograph of a man's face. It was a revelation of a soul that had finally, mercifully, come home to itself. To embody this truth is to realize that self-kindness is not a luxury or a form of weakness. It is the most formidable discipline available to the human spirit. It is the practice of becoming a sanctuary for oneself. Today, perform the beloved test. For the remainder of the day, whenever you catch your inner voice slipping into the language of the critic, pause. Literally stop your movement. Ask yourself, would I say this to someone I love, in this exact tone, with this exact choice of words? If the answer is no, you are not allowed to say it to yourself. You must rephrase the internal observation into a statement of kindness. If you find yourself thinking, I failed at this task, rephrase it to, I am learning, and I am doing my best. You have learned to address the future's fear, the past's resentment, and the inner critic's scrutiny. But there is one final, heavy weight that haunts the human experience, the sense that we have gotten it wrong, and that our current suffering is a debt we are obligated to pay. In the next chapter, we descend into the vault of the ledger. We will confront the shadow of guilt, the belief that we are somehow unworthy of peace because of our past. We will learn that grace is not a reward to be earned, but an inheritance to be accepted. The critic is being silenced, the sanctuary is being prepared, and the final veil is about to be drawn back. Are you ready to forgive yourself? In the deep, quiet architecture of the human spirit, there exists a hidden chamber, a dark, claustrophobic vault, where the heaviest currency is stored. It is the vault of the ledger. Here, the individual keeps a meticulously detailed, soul-crushing record of every perceived transgression, every moment of weakness, and every instance where they believe they got it wrong. It is a room built of shadows and leaden weight. Imagine a person sitting in the center of this vault. The walls are lined with scrolls that stretch into infinity, each one documenting a moment of shame or a regret that feels, in the dark, entirely unforgivable. They believe that their current discomfort, the ache in their back, the persistent tension in their chest, the recurring obstacles in their career is not merely life, but a form of divine or cosmic bill collecting. They sit with their head bowed, convinced that the universe is a stern, celestial accountant, and that they have been found wanting. They carry the secret, heavy conviction that their suffering is, on some profound and fundamental level, deserved. It is a paradox of the heart. While they wish for relief, they simultaneously feel that to receive it without paying the debt would be a violation of some dark, universal law. They are a prisoner who has been handed the key to their own cell, yet remains seated on the cold stone floor, fearing that they haven't earned the right to step into the sunlight. Guilt is the most sophisticated of the four thieves because it masquerades as morality. It disguises itself as conscience, claiming that by suffering, we are honoring the gravity of our mistakes. To heal, we must dismantle the lie that human struggle is a transactional exchange for past error. The recursive why. Why does the human heart equate pain with justice? We have been conditioned, perhaps since the dawn of our consciousness, to believe in the law of the return, that for every action, there must be an equal and opposite punishment if the action was perceived as bad. We fear that if we forgive ourselves, we are somehow condoning the error. We believe that pain is the only way to prove we have learned our lesson. It is a recursive trap. We suffer because we think we should suffer, and that suffering validates our sense of guilt, which in turn fuels the belief that we are bad people who deserve our current pain. We are trying to pay a debt that was never owed, to a creditor that does not exist. The philosophical how? How does this belief manifest in the body? The vibration of guilt is one of the most stagnant frequencies a human can carry. It is a downward pulling force. It signals to the body that it is not allowed to be at ease. If the subconscious mind believes that you are a person who deserves to be punished, it will interpret your experiences through that lens. It will notice your failures, it will highlight your flaws, and it will, with a tragic level of loyalty, sabotage your moments of joy to ensure you stay within the punishment you have deemed appropriate for yourself. The how of the liberation is the total rejection of this transactional model of the universe. It is the terrifying, beautiful realization that grace does not function like a bank account. Grace is not a reward for perfection. It is the atmosphere of the soul, and it is available to the guilty just as fully as it is to the innocent. The truth is that your mistakes have already been folded into the tapestry of your life. They are not debts, they are lessons. The debt was settled the moment you chose to grow. In the high, fortified city of Ethelgard, there lived a nobleman named Valerius, who spent his days in the great archive. He was known for his vast intellect, but his face was etched with a sorrow so deep it seemed to absorb the light. For 20 years, Valerius had lived in a small, windowless cell attached to his grand estate. He spent his nights counting stones, one for each mistake he had made in his youth, an impulsive business deal, a harsh word spoken to his brother, a moment of cowardice during a public crisis. Every morning, he would place a new stone in his bag and carry it with him throughout the day. His back had become permanently stooped, his gait uneven and pained. He told himself that the weight was his duty, a penance for the life he could have lived had he been better. One day, a young scholar came to the archive, looking for an ancient text. She saw Valerius dragging his heavy bag and watched, horrified, as he struggled to stand. Noble lord, she asked, why do you carry a bag of stones into the house of wisdom? Valerius looked at her with hollow eyes. These are my debts, he whispered. I must carry them. If I were to drop them, the scales of the world would become unbalanced. I must pay for my failures. The scholar, who had traveled through the deserts of the south and seen the vast, shifting dunes, laughed softly. She pointed to a window where a bird was rising, effortlessly, on an updraft of warm air. Look at the bird, Valerius. Does it carry the memory of the worms it failed to catch? Does it worry about the flight paths it missed in the storm? No. It understands the simple law of the sky. It is always in the present, and the present is always enough. She stepped forward and opened his bag. She tipped it over, and the stones clattered onto the marble floor. Valerius gasped, reaching out to stop her, but she held his arm with a strength that surprised him. You are not a debtor, Valerius. You are a man. Being human is not a crime for which you must be sentenced to a lifetime of labor. Your mistakes were the friction that sharpened your soul. Do you not see? You are still here. You have learned. That is the payment. You have paid the debt 1,000 times over, in the wisdom you now possess. Valerius looked at the stones, scattered on the floor. He tried to pick one up, but his hand hung limp. He looked at his hand, then at the scholar, and finally at the window. He realized that the ceiling of his life had been low only because he had been holding it up with the weight of his own regret. He stood up, fully upright for the first time in 2 decades, and the air in the room seemed to rush into his lungs as if he had been underwater for a lifetime. The truth is that you are not being punished. You are simply a person who has been human. And being human is the only life you were ever given. To release the guilt of the past is not to ignore your actions, it is to accept that you have outgrown the person who committed them. Today, perform the blank slate exercise. Identify one persistent feeling of guilt you have carried, a regret that hums in your background. Write it down on a piece of paper. Look at it, not as a moral condemnation, but as a piece of history that is no longer occurring. Then, burn the paper or tear it into dust. As you do, speak the truth aloud. I am not the person who made that choice. I am the person who learned from it. You are permitted to move forward, clean and unencumbered. You have now confronted the 4 thieves: fear, resentment, self-criticism, and guilt. You have cleared the sanctuary of your soul. But what remains for the person who has done the work, yet still sees no immediate change in the outer world? The ego is prepared for this, and it has a speech ready to tell you that you are faking it. In the next chapter, we will master the art of the denial, the profound, non-violent, and highly misunderstood technique of interrupting the spiral of the mind. We will learn why nothing appearing to change is actually the most important stage of your transformation. The stones are cleared, the air is clear, and the real work is about to begin. Are you ready to plant the seed? There is a moment in the life of every storm where the wind reaches a velocity that seems to tear the very fabric of reality. Imagine, if you will, the mind in the throes of a genuine crisis, a sudden, sharp turn of fortune, a medical diagnosis, or a collapse of a long-held dream. The instinct of the human mind in these moments is not to remain steady, it is to spiral. It is to take the present, localized difficulty, and with frantic, desperate speed, weave it into a gargantuan tapestry of future ruin. It stacks the current, manageable pain upon the forgotten, unhealed wounds of 10 years ago, building a Tower of Babel out of anxiety. The sensory experience of this spiral is singular. The horizon narrows. The world becomes nothing but the obstacle. The individual, caught in this psychological vortex, begins to rehearse fear until it becomes fact. They describe it to themselves in the present tense. I am losing everything. The situation is permanent. I am trapped. The irony, the cruel paradox of this state, is that the energy they are expending to construct this vision of catastrophe is precisely the energy they need to navigate the actual event. They are feeding the very nightmare they are attempting to flee. The room is quiet, the clock is ticking steadily on the wall, but inside the mind, the roof is caving in. To survive the spiral, one must master the denial. To the uninitiated, this word conjures images of blind illusion of a person standing in a burning house and insisting the temperature is perfectly pleasant. But this is a fundamental misunderstanding of the spiritual law. In the work of Florence Scovel Shinn, the denial is a precise, surgical instrument of the soul. The recursive why. Why does the mind, when faced with a difficult circumstance, insist on granting it the status of final word? The ego is a creature of permanence. It fears change, even change that leads to growth, and so it attempts to freeze time by declaring that the current state is the only state. We spiral because we believe that by obsessing over the negative, we are respecting the seriousness of the situation. We think that panic is a form of vigilance. We fear that if we do not catastrophize, we are somehow irresponsible. The reality is that the ego clings to the problem because the problem gives it a role to play. The philosophical how. How does one practice the denial without descending into the trap of spiritual bypassing? The denial is not the refusal to acknowledge the presence of a symptom or a challenge. It is the refusal to grant that challenge the authority to define your identity or your future. It is a mental firewall. When the spiral begins, the practice is to say, with absolute, unyielding conviction, I do not accept this as the final shape of my life. The how of this practice is in the interruption. You are not denying the fact that a bill is unpaid, or that a body is in pain, or that a relationship is strained. You are denying that these conditions are the whole truth. You are separating the event from the meaning you are projecting onto it. You are stating that you are larger than the moment. This is the definition of spiritual steadiness, the ability to look at the tempest, acknowledge its power, and yet remain anchored to a vision of your own wholeness that exists beyond the storm. In the middle of the great Southern Ocean, there was a captain of a merchant vessel named Elias. He was known for his calm, not because he was unaware of the danger, but because he practiced an ancient maritime art known as the anchor of the will. One winter, a hurricane of unprecedented force descended upon his ship. The sky turned a bruised, unnatural violet. The waves rose like walls of obsidian, threatening to swallow the deck. The crew began to panic, their eyes wide with the certainty of death. They began to shout of their past failures, of the families they would never see again, of the fragility of the ship's hull. They were feeding the storm with their panic, creating a psychic climate that mirrored the destruction outside. Elias walked to the center of the deck, lashed himself to the mast, and looked directly into the teeth of the gale. He did not deny the wind existed. He did not tell the crew the waves were a figment of their imagination. Instead, he gripped the mast and projected a singular, focused thought. This is a temporary condition. This wind is not the master of this ship. This storm is not our destination. He forced his mind to remain outside the spiral. While his crew was busy rehearsing the history of their lives and the potential for their deaths, Elias was mentally navigating the course beyond the storm. He was effectively denying the storm the status of final word. He refused to let the ocean become the definition of his life. By the time the clouds broke, the ship was battered, the sails were shredded, but the vessel remained buoyant. The crew, exhausted and weeping, realized they had survived, not because the storm had lessened, but because the captain had refused to let the storm enter the interior of the ship. He had held the line. He had maintained the denial of the storm's permanence, and in doing so, he had saved them all. The storm was real, but it was not the truth of the voyage. To embody this truth is to claim the right to be a witness to your life rather than a casualty of its circumstances. The next time you find yourself at the beginning of a spiral, The moment you feel the narrowing of the chest, the frantic speed of the thoughts, the what-if scenarios beginning to cascade, you must act. Stop. Literally stand up. Look around the room and bring your senses back to the present. You are in a body, in a room, on a planet, in a moment. Then, state the denial clearly and firmly. I do not accept this circumstance as the final word. I am more than this moment, and this moment is not the whole truth. You are not lying. You are asserting a greater reality. You are refusing to let the current wave become your entire ocean. You have learned to address the future's fear, the past resentment, the critic's scrutiny, the ledger's guilt, and the storm's spiral. But what happens after the denial? Once you have cleared the space and refused the false narrative, what do you put in its place? The mind cannot remain empty. It will rush to fill the void with old, familiar fears. In the next chapter, we will learn the final, most transformative law, the affirmation, the art of planting the seeds of your desired reality into the fertile soil of the soul. The storm is passing, the waters are calming, and the time for planting is at hand. Are you ready to speak your world into being? There is a particular kind of hunger that resides in the human soul, a parched, desolate longing that feels less like a lack of things and more like a lack of meaning. Imagine a vast, sun-baked plain at the height of a drought. The earth is cracked, the air is brittle, and the horizon shimmers with the heat of frustrated desire. This is the inner landscape of the person who has spent their life reacting to the world rather than influencing it. They have spent years trimming the weeds, patching the fences, and fighting the pests, but they have never actually planted a seed. In the center of this parched field sits an individual who has mastered the art of observation but failed the art of creation. They know precisely what they do not want. They can describe their struggles with the eloquence of a poet, but they are speechless when asked to describe what they are building. The air is thick with the dust of their complaints, a gray haze that obscures the potential of the horizon. They are waiting for the rain to fall, for the universe to grant them a harvest, forgetting that the law of the harvest does not respond to the wish. It responds to the sowing. They sit in the silence of their own making, listening to the wind and wondering why their life feels like a barren inheritance, unaware that the power to break the drought is held within their own mouth, in the quiet, steady vibration of a deliberate word. The affirmation is the most misunderstood of all spiritual technologies. It is not, as the cynics suggest, a form of self-hypnosis or a desperate attempt to ignore reality. It is a fundamental law of conscious existence. The spoken word is the bridge between the unseen potential of the soul and the seen manifestation of the world. The recursive why. Why does the word hold such transformative power? Because we are living, resonant beings, and language is the primary tool by which we organize our reality. We use words to interpret the past, to navigate the present, and to anticipate the future. If our words are consistently descriptive of our limitations, we are effectively coding our own boundaries. We think that we are being honest when we say, I am struggling, or I am tired, or things never work out for me. We believe that truth is something we report on. But in the architecture of the soul, truth is something we construct. We ask why we aren't seeing change, yet we continue to repeat the same narrative that anchors us to the status quo. We are the authors of the very history we claim to be victims of. The philosophical how. How do we utilize the affirmation to alter the climate of our lives? It begins with the distinction between performance and alignment. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the spoken word must be grounded in the conviction of the heart. One does not affirm to trick the universe. One affirms to realign the inner environment to match the frequency of the desired state. When we speak an affirmation, I am at peace in my body, or divine love now dissolves every wrong condition, We are not pretending that the wrong condition does not exist. We are asserting a higher truth that is capable of transforming it. We are essentially tuning the instrument. The affirmation acts as a harmonic constant. By repeating it, we provide the subconscious with a new, consistent vibration. The mind, being a responsive, non-judgmental receiver, begins to reorganize our perceptions, our choices, and eventually our circumstances to harmonize with this new note. We are sowing seeds of intention in the fertile darkness of the subconscious, and with the patience of a farmer, we are waiting for the unseen to break the surface. In the lush, verdant valley of the Western Isles, there lived a legendary gardener named Elian. Elian was famous not because his garden was the largest, but because it contained flowers that were said to be extinct, blooms of such rare, vibrant color that they seemed to glow in the twilight. When travelers asked him his secret, he would only point to the gate of his garden, which bore the inscription, "The work happens underground." Elian had a neighbor, a man named Kyle, who was obsessed with the harvest. Kyle would plant his seeds, and then, every afternoon, he would go into his garden with a small spade and dig them up to check on their progress. He wanted to see if the roots were taking hold. He wanted to see if the sprout was forming. Because he kept disturbing the soil, the seeds never stood a chance. They would wither from the exposure. And by the end of the season, Kyle's garden was nothing but a graveyard of upturned earth and failed potential. Elian, on the other hand, would plant his seeds with a ceremony of quiet conviction. He would whisper to the earth, not because the earth understood the words, but because the speaker needed to align his heart with the act of planting. He would then close the gate and walk away. He spent his days tending to the beauty that already existed, trusting completely that the work was happening in the dark. He knew that the most vital stage of growth, the breaking of the shell, the reaching of the root, requires the protection of silence and the stability of the soil. When the sprouts finally broke through the surface, Elian was not surprised. He had lived in the harvest long before the first leaf appeared. Kyle, watching from over the wall, wept for his own failure until Elian invited him over and gave him a single, simple instruction. Plant your desire, trust the silence, and stop digging up your own intentions. Kyle learned that the spoken word is the seed, but patience is the soil. He began to plant with the same conviction as Elian, and within a single season, the valley was filled with the fragrance of a man who had finally learned to trust the unseen. To embody this truth is to master the patience of the farmer. You are currently planting the seeds of your future in the silence of your own mind. Do not dig them up to inspect them. Do not check your progress against the external circumstances of the present hour. The work is happening underground. If you are ready to plant a new seed today and trust the unseen work of your own transformation, like this video, it is a declaration of your commitment to the unseen process. Today, select one affirmation, a single, resonant sentence that carries the weight of the life you are ready to inhabit. Perhaps it is, "I am accompanied by a grace that does not require my perfection, or I release what is not mine to carry." Speak this word in the morning, speak it at midday, and speak it as you drift into sleep. Do not look for an immediate change in your outer life. Look for a change in the climate of your inner world. That is where the roots are taking hold. You have learned the full cycle, the recognition, the clearing, the interruption, and now the planting. But what happens when the old habits try to return? What happens when the ego, threatened by your new peace, attempts to drag you back into the old, familiar war? In our final chapter, we will master the daily ritual of grace, the 3 quiet invitations that will hold your life steady, regardless of the tide. We will conclude our journey by reclaiming the simple, profound dignity of a human life that is no longer a problem to be solved, but a grace to be lived. The soil is prepared, the seed is sown, and the final light is beginning to break. Are you ready for the final step? The threshold of the morning is a fragile, sacred space. the thin membrane between the subconscious realm of dream and the manifest reality of the day. In this quiet interval, before the world demands an identity, before the phone vibrates with the echoes of others' expectations, and before the mind assembles its list of perceived obligations, the individual possesses a fleeting, absolute sovereignty. Imagine standing in a room at dawn. The light is soft, cool, and unformed. You are standing at the very edge of your own existence. This is the moment of truth. Most people rush past this threshold, leaping into the day with the same frantic energy they brought to the yesterday, as if life were a train they were perpetually chasing. But there is another way. There is a way to stand at this threshold, and, instead of running, to simply check in. It is a moment of profound paradox. You have the power to construct the entire architecture of your day, yet the most effective tool at your disposal is an act of total surrender. You are not bracing for the day. You are inviting it. You are not defending your peace. You are breathing it. The silence in the room is not empty. It is a canvas, and the brush is held in your hand, dipped in the ink of your own intention. You are here. You are safe. You are held. And for this brief, exquisite moment, you are allowed to simply exist, without the need for performance or proof. The daily ritual of grace is the culmination of our journey. It is the transition from a life of reactive struggle to a life of conscious habitation. Why does this ritual hold such transformative weight? And how does it function as the anchor for the entire human instrument? The recursive why. Why is it so difficult to remain in a state of grace? Why does the human psyche gravitate toward the agenda of the day the moment it awakens? The ego thrives on momentum. It believes that if it is not doing, it is not being. It fears that if we pause to offer ourselves kindness before we start the work, we might lose our edge, our drive, or our relevance. We fear that grace is the opposite of success. But the why behind our chronic unrest is exactly this. We have been running on the fuel of adrenaline and fear because we did not believe we were worthy of the fuel of grace. We have been trying to earn our right to exist through our output. Grace, however, is not a reward for a hard day's work. It is the condition that makes a life well lived possible. The philosophical how. How do we anchor this truth into the body? We use 3 quiet invitations: the morning check-in, the practice of non-resistance, and the spoken word. These are not tasks, they are states of being. The morning check-in is the act of establishing our sovereignty before the world imposes its narrative. The practice of non-resistance is the art of moving with the river of life, recognizing that what we clinch around, we lock into our own reality. The spoken word is the constant recalibration of our internal climate. The recursive logic is this. The more we practice the ritual, the more natural the state of ease becomes. The body, sensing that it is no longer being forced to fight a war, begins to soften its defenses. The inflammation of stress recedes, the clarity of the mind returns. The ritual is not something you do. It is the environment you inhabit. By returning to these 3 invitations, you are constantly resetting the instrument to the frequency of peace. You are not changing the circumstances. You are changing the player, and in doing so, the music of your life undergoes a metamorphosis. In the high, storm-swept cliffs of the western coast, there lived a lighthouse keeper named Silas. For 50 years, he had manned a tower that stood against the relentless fury of the Atlantic. Many had tried to hold that post, but they had all been broken by the intensity of the isolation and the sheer violence of the elements. They had tried to fight the storm. They had tried to reinforce the walls. They had tried to scream back at the wind. Silas was different. He was a man of quiet, rhythmic grace. Every morning, regardless of the weather, he would climb to the top of the tower, clean the lens of the great lamp, and then sit in the silence for exactly 10 minutes. He did not look at the waves. He did not worry about the supply ships. He simply looked at the light he was tasked to keep and affirmed, "I am the vessel of this illumination, and the light is always enough." When the tempests came and they were legendary, Silas did not clinch. When the tower shook, he breathed into the shaking. When the waves hammered the glass, he stood beside it and recognized that he was larger than the collision of water and stone. He did not resist the storm. He allowed it to move around him. He was a steady point in a chaotic ocean, and because he was steady, the light remained focused. One night, the greatest storm in a century struck the coast. The other lighthouses along the shore went dark, their keepers broken or overwhelmed. Silas's tower was battered until the stones seemed to groan, but he remained at his station, performing his ritual. He was at peace, and because he was at peace, his hands were steady. The light did not flicker. Ships that would have been lost were guided to safety, not by a hero who fought the storm, but by a man who had mastered the art of being a witness to it. He survived, because he understood that the lighthouse does not own the storm. The lighthouse only holds the light, and the light is always enough. To embody this truth is to realize that you are the lighthouse. You are not here to fight the storms of your life. You are here to hold the light steady while they pass. The three invitations, the check-in, the non-resistance, and the spoken word are your tools for this stewardship. You are a person, complex, particular, and irreplaceable, moving through a life that has asked hard things of you. And you are here, which means you are still finding your way. Take this question with you into your own quiet morning. What would it feel like to meet yourself with a little more grace today? Just today. Just this once. And then, tomorrow, ask it again. You have cleared the chambers, you have evicted the thieves, you have mastered the denial, and you have planted the seed. You are no longer the person who walked into this room 1,000 words ago. You are the architect of your own peace. The journey through these 10 chapters has brought us to the threshold of a new way of living a life of dignity, tenderness, and unwavering steadiness. But what lies beyond the threshold? What happens when the peace you have cultivated begins to ripple outward, influencing the world beyond your own skin? In our next grand exploration, we will step out of the lighthouse and into the world. We will learn how to carry this inner climate into the friction of relationships, the demands of the career, and the complexities of the collective. The light is burning, the tower is steady, and the morning is finally breaking. Are you ready to see what the day holds?